Hello and welcome to the Leading Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Dubose. Here in the Leading Lounge, we talk with today's leaders and unpack lessons learned and being learned from a career of leading and communicating in their field. These conversations are designed to be both informal and informative, and we want to equip you with wisdom and tools to empower you as a leader where you are and where you want to be. Hey everybody, if you serve in any leadership role, today's guest is going to be able to speak some things into your life that will be very, very helpful. Come from a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience, and as I told him in the interview, the best boss I ever had, Colonel David Mann, recently retired from the Army Reserves. He spent a number of years in the Special Forces community. He was a detachment commander for the 10th Special Forces Group. And then he spent a number of years in the PSYOP community. He was a company commander, battalion commander, group commander. And when he was a group commander at the 7th Psychological Operations Group, that's where I met him and was very blessed that he agreed to be my guest for today's episode of the Leading Lounge. So make sure you got time to listen. Come back and listen to it multiple times if you need to. But there's so much good stuff here that I know will be a blessing to you. Wanted to say, too, starting this year, I'm on social media, so you can find Communicate to Care on Facebook. Just search for Communicate to Care. Or you can find me, Dr. Justin Dubose, on Twitter. Twitter handle is at JZDPhD. I'd love to get in touch with you and do some dialogue back and forth about what's helpful, what you'd like to hear maybe on these podcasts, some issues you're running into. So enjoy today's episode. Here it is. Hey, welcome in, everybody. Thanks for tuning in again to the Leading Lounge. I got a very special guest. I don't know if I've ever told you this, sir, or if I've just thought it a lot, but my best boss that I've ever had, recently retired, Colonel David Mann. So, sir, thanks for giving me a little bit of your time and sharing some insights, some wisdom, some tools with me and all of us about how to lead well, and let us get to know a little bit about you. So typically the first question I start with everybody, which I'll ask you, is can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional journey that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, former Secretary Mattis had one of the most impactful phrases, especially later in life, that he thinks is one of the biggest failures in leadership that we have in the senior military. I just found it was very appropriate in my life. But he said, leaders don't spend enough time in reflection, was his assessment. It is so task saturated, so immediate response, gratification, results driven, that the whole premise of wisdom, processing, seeing the big picture had pretty much been lost. And I found that to be remarkably true in senior leadership, especially in my own life at various points. So what I will say, using that intro, is my journey was guided by a lot of pain at the beginning, mistakes, leading with the head, no helmet, learning from those mistakes. And then about midway through my career, I realized that I had not mentored the next person that was coming behind me. And I felt a great and profound professional and ethical regret, bordering on sorrow. I realized how important it was. I realized how eyeball level I had been, and I kind of committed to not make that mistake. So for my military track, right, so let's back up. Any reservist, you yourself, right, twice the citizen is the handy little catchphrase, but remarkably accurate. It goes back to Ben Franklin. So you are required to lead an entire private life respondent to whatever corporate or service mechanism for income to survive. And then as the nation calls you, muster into a formation to be in service to the nation as part of the Department of Defense apparatus. So for me, my father had done just that. He had gone to college in ROTC, studied civil engineering, and emerged while the Vietnam conflict was still going on. Spent a year participating overseas, and then did 29 more in the Army Reserve. He never influenced me to join the military, never spoke about what he did, didn't put so much as a feather's weight of influence on the scale to encourage me or talk me out of it, telling me it was terrible. He just did what he did. It was his service to the nation, and he was very responsible with his work. So I followed the same path. competed for an Army ROTC scholarship as a financial security mechanism, could go anywhere I wanted to go, was recruited on the East Coast in an engineering college. And that had worked for Dad, so I thought that would work for me. But I had no love, I had no passion in my engineering forays. And at this point, I'm a second lieutenant in the Army Reserve, and we're still under very much garrison or peacetime apparatus, right? Desert Storm was a blip on the map just before I came in. It was over before it had begun. And other than that, we were under the sales campaign of 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer, right? So yeah, that's before we spent 2 full decades in regular rotation of the conflict. But that's what it was like at the time. So it was an educational benefit. You had a low index of suspicion that you were going to have to actually go do anything. It seemed like a neat thing at the time. So I was originally branched infantry, combat arms, right? Long walks in the wood, heavy ruck, detailed almost immediately to logistics, kind of a thinking person's game. Napoleon, I think, is credited. I don't know that we know it was actually him, but amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. Mm-hmm. And I found a great deal of intellectual challenge. The importance was not lost on me on making sure that everything you needed to prosecute a warfight was in place and sustainable. It was also a way to show care. Soldiers need to stay clean, right? And Napoleon also learned the importance of field sanitation. It's actually credited with our manuals that are still in use today. Food cleanliness, etc. So I took it pretty serious, and had just decided that I was going to be the most dedicated logistician I could be and provide for that tooth to tail network. I'd be on the tail, but I'd be providing to the tooth. And then kind of a collection of 2 significant events or almost 2 miracles happened. Same time. One on the civilian professional side and one at the military side. On the civilian side, I had matriculated through college, got into engineering, had no love for it, reoriented, reinvestigated myself, and embarked in a career of public service, emergency service as a firefighter paramedic. I found remarkable similarities to the military, right, which was very satisfying to me. You have long periods of training, maintenance, personal fitness, camaraderie, punctuated by massive adrenaline dumps. You are going to somebody's worst day, worst event. Elderly grandparent in a heart attack, mom and 2 kids T-boned in a car accident, house on fire, all those things. You got to see the results of your work. That's what I was missing. Mm-hmm. You've got to make a difference. Not always good news, and that does take a toll. But I had found something that I loved. I never woke up after nearly 25 years in the fire service when the alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning going, crap, I've got to go to work today. Mm-hmm. Never once. I can't think of many jobs where people can say that. So that was happening. At the same time, I had to go to an Army professional education school, right? And Army officers, all usually around the rank of captain, attended the school to prepare for a potential staff assignment and understand staff processes better, and they came from all branches. So I was a logistician with medical service corps. You'd have some JAG lawyers. And there ended up being a couple of 18 series. For people not familiar with the military coding, right, that's Special Forces. Green Berets were in the course as well. One helicopter pilot who had served with 160th, which is Special Operations Aviation Regiment. So kind of the full gamut, both, leaf eaters and meat eaters all together going through it. And for whatever reason, I developed a great rapport with the 18 series of Special Forces folks and pilot, and we became kind of a brat pack throughout this course. And by the end of it, one of them looked at me and said, man, we've got to get you into the Special Forces community. And I said, man, I'm about to turn 30. That's a heck of a compliment. I think the ship has sailed. I'm just going to try and be the most combat-focused logistician the Army has to provide. 6 months after that, 10th Special Forces Group did call. They had a new detachment that had no soldiers, had no equipment, did not have a leader, but they had a really big checkbook, and they wanted to know if I wanted the job to build a team and a capability that did not exist. Wow. So we did. And it was tasked with weapons of mass destruction special reconnaissance. And if you remember the very beginning of Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, the hunt was for WMD inside Iraq. That was the narrative. And there was one and only one detachment that was validated to do that mission, and it was mine. So we began the process, combat airfield seizure, which is a significant event, and then prosecuted the very first days of the war in the North in the unconventional warfare concept of linking up with the Kurdish forces that already had an axe to grind with the regime that was in power and had been torturing and murdering, extrajudicial killings, etc. Spent 7 years in the Special Forces community. At that time, it was move up and move out. And they had this nifty little thing called PSYOPs. I loved it when they put the S on it because that doesn't exist. At that time, it was under the USASOC, or United States Army Special Operations Command flag. It was one half. Civil affairs, psychological operations was one half. Special forces was on the other. I'd spent 7 years on one side. I thought that would be a next great step. So that's what I did. Moved not too far away in the reserves to a psychological operations unit. Went to the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center in school. Passed the qualification course. And not long after being in the Colorado unit, a San Diego unit, the 301st, was really hurting for Jumpmaster qualified people. They were on jump status doing airborne operations. And I had just come out of Special Forces. I was current and qualified with my Jumpmaster rating. I said, put me on loan. I'll go out there and help them out. So I did. Did that a few times. About 6 months after that, they said, we'd like you to be the commander here. So for 4 years, I commuted from Denver to San Diego as a company commander of an Army Reserve unit on jump status. So drill weekend, Friday, usually afternoon, people coming in, pack up their rucks, pack up their bullets, pack up their food, head down to an airhead. We do a night jump into some drop zone somewhere, spent all day Saturday training, rig back up on Sunday morning, jump back into San Diego, shake, shoots, clean weapons, turn that in. It was drill weekend. People had gotten maybe 5-6 hours of sleep for the whole weekend and were smiling from ear to ear. You had done something with your weekend. Middle of the night in an aircraft, jumping out, that's a significant emotional event. Mm-hmm. It'll let you know you're alive after you land. So that was, as I rotated out of that, that's where I had that first lightning bolt, or that first punctuation mark on transitioning leadership, of where I was task saturated and I didn't grow my people. I didn't share enough with my people. I don't think I was toxic. I still challenged and improved proficiency. But the second I walked out that door and had that rock in my rucksack of regret, I really committed to making sure I did not repeat that mistake, which comes in the form of mentoring, a little bit more direct still now rather than that senior. After company, did 2 battalion commands in reserve, 12th Psychological Operations Battalion, and then 5th and 98th out on the East Coast. Was the first group commander of the EPLO group. That was a period of time where we were doing a broadening assignment. Got to spend 7 years working interagency. So I was working with FEMA. For people who don't know, if a disaster strikes your state, Texas, Washington, Hawaii, doesn't matter, earthquake, flood, hurricane, you name it, FEMA has the ability to look towards the military and get resources it might need to assist fire departments, police departments to save Americans. Not a combat mission, but a support mission. I thought that would be a good mix of all my emergency services experience with the fire department coupled with the military. So did that for a few years, and then finally HRC called and said, hey, we don't have a mileage waiver on your brigade command selection list. And I said, well, I don't need one. I'm already in a brigade command right now, group command. I can see why you wouldn't see it because I'm the first one. It just came off the books. They're just out of carrier status, but I'm good. And they said, oh, you don't want a group or brigade? And I said, well, maybe if you had a PSYOP group, I might be interested. Hung up the phone. 24 hours later, orders arrived. And that's where you and I met because I was the 7th PSYOP group commander at that point. Told the wife I didn't really have to do this. And she said, you've been telling me for I don't know how many years how you could do it better, how you could take care of soldiers, how you could empower people. Put up or shut up time, cowboy. I was thinking about turning my back on that one, that I had done enough. And it was a leadership challenge. And then, as you mentioned, recently retired from both. November 1st was the end of 34 and a half years of military. And about a year before that, I left the fire service, not quite 25 years. And now I work as a defense contractor at Fort Meade.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if I've ever told you this, or if I, again, just thought it, but I wanted to just affirm for you. I think taking the command at 7POG was a good thing. When we were in the middle of COVID, virtual world was not something I enjoyed. I'm a serial extrovert. I love people. I love being around people. And I typed up a resignation letter on 7POG letterhead, addressed it to you, and I was going to resign my commission. And I called you. I don't know if you remember, but I called you and said, I think I don't want to do this anymore. Too many kids, too much responsibility, all this kind of stuff. And having that conversation with you, where you basically said, hey, I'll support you no matter what you want to do, but you might want to think about, these things, was a big factor in me not hanging it up. I'm talking to you from Fort Hood. And so I credit still being in and however long that lasts to you being at group. So I'm grateful you took that command and got to have the chance to work with you. I wanted to also ask you, so you mentioned 34 and a half years in the military, and you mentioned some of those twists and turns as far as realizations you had along the way about mentoring versus being so task oriented. So when you think about some of those roles you had earlier, how did some of those early assignments help prepare you for leadership roles later in your career, like maybe being the commander at 7POG?
Well, I wish I could take great credit for being shrewd enough or aware enough or savvy enough to have figured out what to do, but that would not be a genuine story. The truth of the matter is I stumbled into, I think, the single biggest lesson, or at least one of the biggest ones, by accident. JRTC, right? Fort Polk, Louisiana. Lovely place this time of year. Any time of year, really. We were there for the standard rotational exercise. I was a loggie at this time, and the next unit higher, I don't know what percentage of the audience is military, but I was a company element. I actually had a platoon there, but I was supporting a battalion, a large organization, and they were using their bully pulpit as a battalion to steal my people and not let me know about it. Now I think I'm either a senior, if there is, boy, these are funny words to put together in the same sentence. I was either a senior second lieutenant or a junior first lieutenant as far as timing goes. It sounds hilarious now, but I don't know, the third or fourth time I had asked for a particular NCO and heard that, oh, they're gone, they're on XYZ mission. I had no visibility, no tracking on it whatsoever. I go roaring into the talk, and this captain, S3 type, was there, and I am in an emotional state. And I am letting him know how, and using all the poor word choices and all the real emotion about this behavior that's been going on and how I'm no longer going to tolerate it. And about the time my brain becomes aware again, we are now outside of the tent. I have the scruff of his shirt in my fist, and I see a white tape helmet right next to us, which back in the old days meant that was the observer evaluator guy. And he's got a big eagle on, back then we collars, right? So he's a full bird colonel. So I'm at the bottom and he's at the top, and I've got a captain by the scruff of his shirt yelling at him. My face is all red. And the colonel, very calm, looks at the captain and says, Captain, do we have a problem? He said, Sir, we absolutely do not have a problem. I just need to fix a few things before this lieutenant kicks my ass. What I didn't know is somebody from my unit was in the vicinity and had watched me fight for them, had watched me advocate for them, watched me try and protect them and stop the quote unquote abuse. It's not like they were getting beat or imprisoned or anything like that. And I didn't know that they'd seen it. I wasn't putting on a show. And for the rest of the rotation, everything was done before I even asked for it. We had 5 trucks. We were supposed to be delayed because we were missing parts. They were all ready to go when it was time to roll out. Then after it was done, it got back to me that somebody had picked up on my behavior. And they just didn't see a lot of that role and responsibility of leadership, advocating, protecting, because it's a form of empowerment. It's a form of demonstrating the value of the organization. And in the military, especially in the old days, it so frequently ran just one direction, right? Everybody lives to serve the top. And that was, some of them said for the first time, that was the first time they'd seen somebody kind of do that. So that, while I wasn't kind of emotionally or intelligently fully aware, it was, okay, this is an important behavior to continue to model. By the time I got into that psychological operations company, after Special Forces time, I'd matured enough to really realize some important lessons. I used it from that day forward. So we're now talking about 2006. This is now 2015. So about the last 15 years, my general position has been a climate of respect, a climate of trust, and an absolute intolerance of micromanagement. I think micromanagement is the most sincere form of personal insecurity. And I started at the 301st with my officers. Do not micromanage your NCO. He's been doing it, or she has been doing it longer than you. They're better at it than you. And it's not your job. It is their job. I'm not saying that you shouldn't know what's going on, but don't micromanage it. What you should be embracing is communicating your desired end state, your timeline requirement, and the left and right limits, and then checking on progress. And if there are any resource constraints, that's your job. So you can look up and out and service the strategy, let them do it. And I'll bet you $1 and a cold Mountain Dew that it will be done ahead of schedule and better than you thought it would be by the time it was done. I have found whenever I've employed that strategy of leadership, of empowerment, professional trust, especially when demonstrated. You're not going to win 100% of the time. There are still people that are not worthy of that trust, and you have to learn the hard way. But I think as I look back in the big data pool of numbers where I've tried to lead that way, I trust that method. So to try and tie a bow on it, demonstrating the care and concern that leaders should have about the people entrusted to their care, sometimes referred to as subordinates, seems to be a very rare thing. I think a lot of people would tell you that. I think the culture of micromanagement is far too pervasive, and people don't appreciate the climate and culture, the second and third order effects on which, again, I'll sign my name to, just a manifestation of your own insecurity. And then holding people accountable, particularly in a military formation, your non-performers. It was kind of it'll sound kind of counterintuitive, but when somebody's held accountable and or disciplined and or removed, particularly in a military formation, morale goes up, not down. Because you have so many people that are trying so hard and are doing the right thing and meeting that standard. And so often leaders turn a blind eye and just accept the ones that are not in the mix, forcing those other ones to compensate for them. I absolutely committed in the most senior stage, that I would never turn my back on that one, never wait a problem out until it transferred or until I did. So I think those are the big ones. And as I do get chances on occasion to interact with audiences, sometimes ROTC battalions will call me and ask me for a leadership seminar or a guest speaker engagement here and there, Christmas party every now and again. We'll talk about some of these big leadership. These are the things about leadership that I believe in. Back over to you.
Yeah. So the thing I appreciated most about your leadership was that empowerment and basically that trusting people to do their job. And when you release them and empower them, they do it. So I want to ask you about the best leader you ever served with and what it was about them that made them great. Was it that empowerment? Did someone empower you somewhere along the way, or was it something else?
Yeah, so it is a challenging one. I have served with some absolutely amazing leaders, and it's just so hard for me because I just still, Stephen King has a great quote that I use frequently as well. You can't outrun your childhood. I grew up with all the World War II movies, some of them still in black and white, right? And George C. Scott was Patton, right? And I just thought that is the pinnacle of leadership, that actor playing General Patton. And so I was always on the lookout for that guy in the Army. I never really did find him, but I've met some very similar ones. The problem I have in answering that question is they are outnumbered 2,000 to 1 by absolute decisions based on fear, cult of personality, bean counters that are more concerned with some metric on a spreadsheet, and even the recent Chief of the Army Reserve, far and wide, published paper realizing we have gotten too metric centric. And so for all of us retirees in this command that you and I served in together, we attended the senior meeting with all the KCOM generals and the PSYOP colonels. And with this paper hot off the presses about we're too focused on numbers rather than people, by the end of that meeting, they had added 2 more metrics that we needed to track. And God, yeah, that happened. So they were all like, this is so important. This is so spot on. And we need more metrics to track this. So it becomes harder to remember the good people that were clear-eyed. The other one that I took in that I stole is from Wayne Gretzky when asked what made him great, right? His handle in hockey, the great one. Said, I don't skate to where the puck is. I skate to where I think the puck is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
I have found that remarkably accurate. Ron Green, 528 Special Operations Support Battalion Commander, was absolutely that way. One of the people in attendance in the audience when I retired, Major General Miguel Castellanos, as cool as the other side of the pillow. The commanding general of USASOC right now, John Braga, Lieutenant General John Braga, first general officer, ever told me that my plan was too small. I had 1,000 generals before him telling me to take my plan and shrink it down and make it fit. He was the first one that encouraged me to think bigger. And I was always thinking what I thought was pretty big, but I was also so jaded. I thought this is absolutely the maximum that they'll go for. And he saw clearly all kinds of opportunities and the importance of it. And he was so nice to be trusted to do my job.
Mm-hmm.
Trust people to do their job. Yeah, that's something that I think is missing. Can I sign my name to an exact person that just absolutely did it for me? No, but game recognized game, I think is the phrase from the streets, right? Run into those people, those lightning rods, you yourself being one of them, my war priest, right? You just embody the total soldier care that could be present and confident in the worst conditions imaginable. Anthony Sloan, had to call him out, right? Best logistician I've met in my whole career. So cool, so precise, just unbelievable. Whenever I see those behaviors, I'm like, yeah, okay.
Speaking to that from the other side of the coin of the younger guy who had a leader like that, was on the military side, I throw out your name. On the civilian side, I throw out the guy who was my first pastor, who was a 1972 graduate of the Naval Academy, commissioned in the Marine Corps as an infantry officer, and then later became an Army chaplain. And anyway, long story short, he died a little over a year ago from cancer, and I'm standing up at his funeral at this beautiful chapel in Fort Worth. And I tell the story of being a young mid-20s, aspiring pastor chaplain guy. And to me, this guy is like the standard. And he trusted me and basically just said, hey, look, you can do it. Go for it. When the young version of me says, this guy had absolutely no reason to trust me. I would not have trusted me. I would not have given me that much authority. I would not have turned me loose. But to see someone trust you that much, like you said, it not only makes it fun and enjoyable, but it sort of just brings out something, I think, within people that's there that they would never, in a micromanaging environment, they would never go, hey, let me try this. Maybe I can do that. So answering that question, rather than this particular person, is more just the character traits that make up the best leader you've ever served with is good. And I would answer the same way. So 2 focuses of this podcast. One is on leading in general, and the other is on communicating. I have found that people can identify much more with people's failures than they can with their successes. And so one of the questions I like to ask people is to share a time in particular when you failed at communicating somewhere along the way in your career and what you learned from it. And when, in that failure, did it change how you approached communicating with people from that point on?
Man, it's a long list of communication failures, and there's really no excuse for it. There just needed to be some emotional learning, and I was wired to be very high on emotion because I have a commitment to being authentic. But
Mm.
usually the first violation is the very important rule, never miss an opportunity to keep your mouth shut. It was not my strength. And I don't think the outcome was particularly costly, but we had a terrible event, a soldier suicide in 12th Battalion years ago, and in the middle of an auditorium. And we were at Fort Lewis, JBLM, we call it now, up in the Seattle area. And Colonel Jeff Scott, who I love and admire and has been very impactful and very important in my growth, was embracing a behavior that had already kind of set me on edge. And it was just that he had his nostalgia factored in. We were in the field, and we had very limited communications, and we're trying to deal with all of the important activities when you have a terrible event like a soldier suicide.
Hmm.
And he was up on the stage and, the briefing room, and was talking about how wonderful this all was. And I decided to engage him in front of a public audience. And I mean, it was like Moses in the Red Sea, right? Everybody in between his and my path kind of shrunk to the sides. And I went at him, hook 'em horns, Texas fight. And Jeff, by way of background, was a Dallas SWAT, so he's not going to shrink back. It went very poorly, as it should have. That was not the forum. So what did I learn from that? One can have a discipline to understand that you are emotional and be authentic, but take the emotion out of your communication.
Hmm.
Handcuff that to an absolute commitment to not having a thin skin, which is another behavior that is run amok in so many places, private, but especially the military. Anything can seem like an insult. So taking the emotion out and still, do I want to make a point, or do I want to make a difference?
Hmm.
Is another communication skill when I've got time to be deliberate in my communication. I want to make a difference. I want to recognize that we have either training shortfalls or equipment shortfalls that need to be replaced, because it translates into soldiers coming home because we can accomplish our mission. So I think when it comes to communication, those are things I find. Perhaps it's just the warmth and comfort that comes with a little bit of age-based wisdom and experience, turning base to final into that grandfather chapter possibly, or age, where I take things a little bit less personally. I certainly don't buy into my own hype. I can hear bad news. Bad news gets worse with age. I don't shoot the messenger. And then at the end, encouraging candor. So that in our organization, that was the absolute thing. And I left this lesson off the table in the earlier points on questions. When I was back at 12th Battalion, I had a brilliant operations officer that was in the AGR program. And he always tried to answer questions, communications where we're at, always tried to answer questions with the overarching jam or marmalade that everything's fine. There's just a few small things. And so I would have to mine this guy to get to what's really missing and wrong about it. It would be significant. It wasn't critical, but it would be serious. Chris, gosh darn it, speak with candor. I trust you. I have to know your analysis. You're smart. I'm going to listen. If it's bad news, it's even more important. I am not going to. It took probably 3 months of having that conversation over and over before he could just open, hey, I've discovered where we've got a gap, our flank's exposed, and here's some recommended changes. Yes, good.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I want candor, but I do not lead by consensus. Right and wrong or indifferent. I don't take votes. We're here to protect democracy, not practice it in my command. You will speak your mind. I insist it. I don't take it personally. But at the end of the day, the leader makes the decision. Also owns all of the responsibility. You don't get to socialize that back out if something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was another thing I made very clear. That's the best nuts and bolts I think I can throw in.
No, that's good. Good example. And you may have answered this question within that question or with previous questions too, but one of the questions I love to ask people is if the present David Mann could visit with the younger David Mann, a little more hair, a little less experience, what advice about leadership would you give your younger self now that you've got all this hindsight behind you?
I do. It is. It's just interesting, and I'm just again a little bit of professional or personal. I shouldn't say professional. Personal shame. That why didn't I learn these lessons earlier? Why did it take so long? Two big ones, and I've sprinkled them in, but they weren't really highlight points. Number one, make no decisions based on fear. Civilian leaders, spiritual leaders, it really doesn't matter, but particularly military, very common to come into already a very harsh, very demanding, and very fast-paced environment. Could be equally dynamic in a corporation, could be equally dynamic in a place of worship with emotions running hot. It really is, could be applied anywhere. And so my natural tendency, whether it was conscious or unconscious, was to gravitate to decisions that would not cause problems or get me in trouble. That is not what military leadership requires. You need to be clear in your thought and comfortable with the consequences. I did a very poor job at that earlier in life. So I would encourage my younger self to be self-aware. All of us are going to feel stress at various points. We're all going to feel anxiety. Do you have the self-awareness to realize or have the discipline to process and the analytical rigor to look inward? Am I drifting towards making a decision based on emotion, especially fear or anxiety? Am I looking at the total problem, and am I going to speak the truth? Did not do a very good job. Learned it later in life, applied it for sure. So if I could grab that scrawny kid with fabulous hair, thick, luxurious mane, I'd say, hey, that. Second, don't buy into your own hype, okay? Especially as a rookie firefighter in an organization like that, and getting into special forces in an organization like that, you know, very high ego quotient organizations, very competitive. It creates an environment where it's a very easy trap to buy into your own hype, to take yourself too seriously. Mm-hmm. That breeds intolerance in your reaction to others. It definitely caused some friction. I'm always on the lookout. I think the card sharks or the pool sharks in the room are always the humble people. Professional humility definitely tingles my spidey senses and makes me put my hand on my hip where my gun should be. That's going to be the most dangerous man in the room. That one that's just got that confidence and as humble as can be, he's learned that lesson as well. So I think those were the two biggest things I have to point and laugh at myself. Like, you knucklehead. You thought you were just such an alpha predator and bought into your own stuff.
Yep. No, that's great advice. I was going to tell you when I first got my very first OER, which, you know, the nature of OERs is you make everyone sound as great as you can. So when I got my first OER, I went into the pastor I was telling you about. I went to his office and I was like, "You gotta see this. Like I'm great. I'm really hot stuff. Like, look what these people that I serve with are saying about me." And he was like, "Listen, Justin, remember this as long as you live. Don't believe your own OER. Don't read it and don't believe it and don't take it to heart." Same advice and good advice. All right, last question here, sir. I love to ask this to people who have a long career of service, but I found that people in the military have really amazing stories, especially people who have done really amazing things. So in your, whatever you said it was, 34 and a half years, what's the best story that you can share publicly from that time?
I can, and I gave that one some thought, and it's a very natural one, and it actually doesn't involve combat. So when I had that San Diego psychological operations company that was full of paratroopers on jump status, one of the drop zones that we utilized was Trident Drop Zone. and the entire flight path is along the border wall. Presents some challenges, right? You could theoretically drift all the way over into a different nation and some other things. It's a very challenging drop zone, but I jumped it a million times, knew it like the back of my hand, and on the other side of the wall is Tijuana. So the paratroopers, stand up, hook up. You've heard the commands, or if you've seen Band of Brothers, you see what that looks like in the back. Everybody's got their kit on, the doors open. I'm leaning out. I'm hanging by my fingertips. I've got my landmarks. I give my 1 minute. I give my 30 seconds, and the green light does not turn on. And I see the whole drop zone. I'm like, we should be, nope. Everybody sit down. Go in a big racetrack, about 12 minutes. Do the whole thing again. We do that 5 times. Green light never turns on. At that point, I get the Air Force loadmaster telling me the pilots want to see you in the cockpit. So back of a C-130, right? Everybody's kind of sitting herringbone with their knees in their rucks and whatnot. And I'm just walking across all of them, just crunching them down. I get up into the cockpit. I put the headset on so I could talk. Got the engineer, pilot, co-pilot, crew chief, everybody's up there. And they said, real quick, here's the deal. For this Air Force red light, green light system, we've got to hit these like GPS beacons on the route that we've programmed in. And we're running like Windows 95 up here. And we have tried resetting, we've tried plugging it in and unplugging it and plugging it back in, all the tech support stuff. And all of the lights turn green, but the one at the front end of the leading edge of the drop zone. So you will not get a green light. We're flying. I got 44 paratroopers right behind me. And he said, so what I recommend is we convert this jump into a Jumpmaster controlled release. I said, that sounds great. Now, between you and me and whoever happens to be listening, especially the road paratroopers, there is no such thing as a Jumpmaster controlled release. That's just Air Force talk for Kentucky windage. Pitch them out whenever you want. We'll fly the pattern. Breaks every single doctrinal rule that we've ever been taught. If Benning had ever heard this story, that I had done this, they would have raced down so fast to pull those wings and Jumpmaster rating off my chest. Oh, anyway. So I get down from meeting with the pilots and talking about this one, and I have to inform the soldiers. Here's the deal. Course of action 1. We've got a malfunction in the equipment. We can absolutely go back to brownfield land, derig, whatever, and we'll jump another month or another time. No harm, no foul. Or if you trust me that I know this drop zone, they're going to fly the same pattern. They are on track. I know this drop zone like the back of my hand. I will dispatch you, and I assure you, you will land safely center line of this drop zone. And to a man, they said, let me out of this aircraft. So I went through 8 passes as a static jump master, knowing where I was in the air, seeing that warehouse. This is where the green light turns on, tapping them out. 44 people. But to a man, they said, I trust you. If somebody had caught that story along the way, oh my goodness, that was my favorite story. Number 1, doctrine is framework. Number 2, spirit of the law versus letter of the law. Number 3, faith, trust, confidence. Right? I don't know that I have ever received a bigger compliment than watching 44 paratroopers say, no, I trust you so much that I'm going to go right out on that red light. Let's do this. If that had caught wind that we exited 44 paratroopers intentionally on a red light, they would not be thrilled.
We're past statute of limitations on that now, I guess, right?
Correct.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome story. And I'm sure it made you feel great. I was just thinking as you were telling that story, those kind of scenarios would be good to determine. I don't know if it'd be a good entry or exit criteria as a gauge of leadership. All right, we're going to set up this scenario, and you've got to tell your people they got to trust you, and we'll just see how they respond, and that'll be your grade as to whether you've done a good job or not.
That's that makes a lot of sense. Why don't we do more stuff like that? Give a chance to lead, and then have a lab, for lack of a better word, like that, where that leader is presented a scenario and see what the followers do.
Here's your OER. We're going up, and we'll see what happens. Well, sir, like I said, I appreciate your time, and I mean it when I tell you and other people that you're the best boss I've had, and it was because of all the things you just mentioned. I know because I was with you for a few years there are not just slogans, and they're not just mottos, but there's things that you you live out. And so you were a big blessing to me. And like I said, I really appreciate your time, and praying that retirement or whatever it is that you're in now, it's not really quite retirement yet, is good. And
no, it's been my great pleasure, and you are authentic in both your leadership and your care. It's evident. It emanates from you, whatever your role is, to either bring leadership or to bring comfort or stability or to combat fear. You've got it, and I'm excited to see how far it takes you and where you're supposed to go with those talents. So
I appreciate that. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Lead Lounge, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us today. The Leading Lounge is brought to you by Communicate to Care, where we are building better leaders by building better people. For more information, visit us online at www.communicatecare.com. This is your host, Dr. Justin Dubose, and we'll see you next time, right here in the Leading Lounge.